sitting in a bar were being pushed around by off-duty cops, and the officers had no idea one brother was a ship's captain and the other a SEAL commander. "Hey, you two, I think you'd better leave before this gets messy," Officer Brett Coleman said, cutting through the country music as he and two partners closed a semicircle around the twins' table. It was Friday night at Danny's Tavern, a place people treated as unofficial police territory. The low light barely hid the tension. Daniel and David Thompson, 34, had barely touched their beers when the officers approached. "Is there a problem, officer?" Daniel asked evenly, eyes on his bottle. He looked too calm for a man being intimidated. Brett didn't notice, but Rick Torres did, his jaw tightening. Brett leaned forward, hands on the table. "This isn't exactly the kind of place for people like you. We don't want trouble." The youngest officer, Jake Morrison, who smelled of drink, snorted and added that the bar was their turf and they didn't want suspicious characters around. Some patrons glanced over. Most pretended not to see. Daniel and David exchanged a split-second look, a flash that carried years of shared experience, when to stand firm and when to step back. What Brett mistook for submission was actually calculation. Daniel was taking note. Brett's exposed right side, Rick's hand hovering near his holster despite being off-duty, Jake's unsteady gait. David had already spotted the 3 security cameras, measured the route to the emergency exit, and saw the bar owner watching uneasily from behind the counter. "Look, we don't want any trouble," Daniel said, his voice that same unnerving calm. "We'll finish our drinks and go." Brett slammed his palm down, rattling the bottle. "You're leaving now, and you'll thank me for being in a good mood." A memory flashed through Daniel. 15 years old, stopped and searched for no reason, humiliated. They were not boys anymore. David, slow and deliberate, pulled out his wallet. "Funny, maybe we should see your IDs. Just to be sure you're really police," he said. Brett's face reddened. "You challenging me?" Rick muttered, trying to calm his partner. Jake, drunk and belligerent, jabbed a trembling finger at David. "You think you can come here and act like you own the place? We run this town. We run this town," Daniel repeated, and for the first time his voice carried an edge. Brett shoved Daniel. The bar fell silent. Even the music seemed to hush. The bartender dropped a glass and slipped his phone out, palms sweating. The twins rose in perfect unison, their movements almost choreographed. Same height, the same athletic build that their shirts only partly hid. "We're leaving," Daniel said, "but you'll regret how you handled this." Brett laughed, loud and forced. "We'll see who regrets it when I search you outside." Tension hung thick in the air. 2 men who had learned to survive every test life threw at them, facing 3 officers who saw only a confrontation. "You really don't know who you're talking to, do you?" David asked quietly. It wasn't a threat. It sounded more like pity. "I don't care if you think you're royalty," Jake slurred. "Here, you're nobody." The twins walked toward the exit, Brett and the other officers trailing them. Rick felt a cold warning run down his spine. Maybe it was the way the 2 brothers moved, steady, unhurried, and completely in control. Not like men who were scared, more like men who had already weighed every possible outcome. At the door, Daniel stopped and turned. "One last chance to step back and apologize for how you acted in there." Brett puffed out his chest. "Or what?" Daniel smiled, not with anger, but with a calm certainty that made the air tighten. It was the expression of someone who wasn't trying to win, because he already had. "Or nothing," he replied. "Just thought it was fair to warn you." No one in that bar, especially not Brett Coleman, could have guessed that the next 15 minutes outside would change their lives forever. Optional YouTube segment, CTA. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens when arrogance collides with reality, make sure to subscribe. What's about to happen in that parking lot will prove that people you underestimate can be the last ones you want to provoke, and some truths can end careers in minutes. The parking lot behind Danny's Tavern was almost empty. Streetlights flickered weakly over the cracked pavement. Brett shoved Daniel against the hood of a car, the cold metal pressing into his back. "You know the problem with people like you?" Brett growled, whiskey heavy on his breath. "You walk around acting like you belong wherever you go." Jake staggered around David, barely steady on his feet. "I'm sure you're carrying something you shouldn't, he snickered. We're going to check. Rick hovered behind them, uneasy, hand close to his side. Something about these two men felt wrong, not in the way Brett thought, but in the way a seasoned instinct warns you when you're pushing a boundary you shouldn't. Daniel stayed still against the hood, but his eyes were calculating. Angles, distances, timing, a skill he had learned far from home. Fallujah, 2011. Captain Daniel Thompson crouched behind broken concrete. 3 armed hostiles ahead. 3 seconds to make the call. 3 seconds to keep his team alive. A sharp slap snapped him back to the present. Brett hit him on the side of the head. I'm talking to you. Careful what you say, David said softly. He still hadn't moved, but his voice had weight, the kind that comes from a man who has commanded silence with a single sentence. Some words can't be taken back. Jake shoved him. Oh yeah, what are you going to do? File a complaint? He laughed, arms out. We are the law here. Brett began pulling items from Daniel's pockets. Wallet, phone, keys, tossing them onto the ground. That's a pretty nice phone for someone who probably didn't buy it honestly, Brett said. Pick that up, Daniel said. Not loudly, not angrily, but with authority. An instinctive command, the kind that, in another environment, meant move now or people get hurt. Brett heard the tone and bristled. Or what? Norfolk Naval Base, 2018. Commander David Thompson inspected his SEAL platoon, 20 of the toughest operators under his command. Real strength isn't about force, he told the new recruits. It's knowing exactly when to use the power you have. Now Jake tried to search him, but his hands shook too much from alcohol. Stay still, he barked, but his voice cracked. David stood taller than him by almost half a foot, and even relaxed, his presence was overwhelming. Do you have any idea how many violations you've committed in the last 10 minutes? David asked calmly. Intimidation, physical aggression, unlawful search without cause. Oh, listen to this guy, Brett said, laughing. A street attorney. Rick stepped forward. Brett, seriously, enough. They're leaving. Let it go. Since when are you soft, Torres? Brett snapped. People like this need to learn respect. Across the lot, Luis, the bar owner, watched from behind the window, his phone recording everything. He had seen Brett pull this stunt countless times with people he assumed couldn't fight back. Tonight he had picked the wrong targets. But this time, something was different. The twins didn't look afraid. They looked patient, like men waiting for a timer only they could see. You know what I think? Jake said, growing bolder as he mistook their calm for weakness. I think you two came here looking for attention. He jabbed a finger into David's chest. People like you always want attention. Daniel and David exchanged that same half-second glance, a silent, precise message. Anyone with military training would have recognized it instantly. Coordinated readiness, the kind honed in real operations, not bar fights. Brett snapped open a pair of handcuffs. You know what? I think we'll take you in anyway. Suspicious behavior, ignoring instructions. Ignoring? Daniel repeated. Then he slowly turned to face Brett. We haven't ignored anything yet. The word yet hung between them like a fuse. Kandahar, 2015. The Thompson brothers operated side by side for the first time overseas. You don't remove fear, Daniel had told David. You control it. Let them think they've got you cornered. Then you move when they relax. Jake stumbled again, his balance failing him. You really don't understand how things work here, he slurred. This is our city, our turf. And you? Visitors? David suggested calmly. Or were you going to use another word? Jake's face darkened. I was going to say you're a problem that needs to be handled. Brett lifted the cuffs. Hands behind your back. Now. No, Daniel said. Just that one simple word. The parking lot froze for 3 long seconds as Brett blinked, surprised. What did you say? I said no. Daniel crossed his arms slowly. We haven't done anything wrong. We're not being cuffed. And if you put your hands on me again, you're going to regret that decision. For a moment, Brett genuinely didn't know how to react. He wasn't used to people standing up to him, especially people he assumed would be easy targets. Are you threatening me? Brett snapped. No, David replied. He's warning you. Huge difference. Rick stepped back, instincts triggering hard now. Brett, seriously, something's off. Let's leave it. But Brett was too far gone. Pride, anger, and alcohol mixing into a reckless cocktail. No, they're learning something tonight. He grabbed his radio. I'm calling backup. We'll do this the official way. Official, Daniel repeated, laughing once, but the sound had zero humor. You have no idea what that word means. Jake reached for David's arm, but the commander rotated his body just slightly. Jake's hand caught nothing but air. The movement was effortless, the kind of trained, economical motion that only comes from years of combat drills. Rick saw it, and Rick understood. This wasn't coincidence. This was training. Brett, Rick said urgently, stop, now. Enough, Torres. Stand down. Inside the bar, Luis switched off the last lights. The place went dark. He was still filming from the window. Daniel checked his watch. A matte black Luminox Navy model, unmistakable to anyone familiar with military teams. You have exactly 1 minute, Daniel said, to apologize and walk away. Brett barked a laugh. Or what? Or, David said, you'll find out what happens when officers harass high-ranking military personnel. The sentence hit the air like a detonator. Brett frowned, trying to process the words. High-ranking? Military? But Jake, fueled by liquid courage and terrible judgment, made the worst choice of the night. He pulled out his baton. Enough talking, he growled and advanced. And that was the moment everything changed. Nobody, not Brett, not Jake, not even Rick, could have predicted that the next 30 seconds would be captured on camera, shared online, analyzed frame by frame, and bring down not just 3 careers, but an entire internal network that had relied on fear and silence. Because Daniel and David Thompson weren't simply 2 men who knew how to protect themselves. They were elite operators, trained with pinpoint discipline, waiting for the exact moment when self-defense would be unquestionable and fully documented. Jake's baton cut through the air, but it never connected. David shifted his head just 2 centimeters, the smallest, cleanest movement possible. Jake stumbled past him, thrown off by his own force. Before anyone could react, Daniel had already pulled out his phone. Recording an unprovoked use of force by an armed officer, he narrated calmly. Attempted physical assault against an unarmed civilian. Turn that off, Brett roared, lunging. But Daniel stepped back with perfect distance and balance, still filming. Fascinating, David said as he lifted his own phone. Now it's 2 officers attempting to take private property while continuing aggression. Rick Torres exhaled sharply, realization striking him like a brick. He finally understood. Something in Rick's chest warned him the twins were not ordinary targets. The brothers moved with a quiet precision, coordinated without words, eyes always scanning, every motion deliberate. Special operations, Rick thought. Not just soldiers, but operators. Stop this now, Rick said urgently, grabbing Brett's sleeve. Brett shrugged him off. Are they recording? Fine. I'll show the world how we handle people who resist. He tried to make the moment a performance of authority. Then Luis stepped out of the bar's back door, phone in hand, also recording. I already called the county sheriff, he announced, and I've sent these clips to 3 local papers. Brett swore under his breath. You're fired, Luis, and expect a health inspection tomorrow. A woman's voice cut through the tension. A black woman in a suit emerged from a shadowed car, calm and composed. Because I am Assistant District Attorney Lisa Monroe, she said, stepping forward with her badge displayed, I just witnessed 3 officers commit multiple offenses. Brett's face drained. Lisa named them harassment, intimidation, attempted assault, abuse of authority, counting each accusation off on her fingers. Jake stammered, pointing at the twins. They started it, he blurted. The footage I've received says otherwise, Lisa replied coolly. It shows you initiating the encounter and continuing after repeated warnings. She glanced at the brothers. Recognition sparked in her eyes. Commander Thompson, long time. She then looked to Daniel. Captain Thompson. Silence fell like a blanket. Rick shut his eyes, the scale of the mistake settling on him. Brett's drunken reasoning faltered. Jake simply froze. Daniel stepped forward. His stance shifted. Not the avoidance of someone seeking to de-escalate, but the quiet command of a leader accustomed to directing men in combat. "Captain Daniel Thompson," he said plainly, "U.S. Army Ranger Instructor at West Point." David followed with his own credentials. "Commander David Thompson, Navy SEALs, Team 6, currently on leave after multiple deployments." The names landed like a blow. They had just hassled two of the country's most highly trained officers, and it had been captured on camera with witnesses. Brett tried to reassert control, but his voice trembled. "You never identified yourselves." "We're not required to identify ourselves when we're being unlawfully harassed by off-duty intoxicated officers," Daniel replied, now unmistakably in command. Rick raised his hands. "Look, this was a misunderstanding. Let's all walk away." Lisa's tone cut sharper than ice. 3 armed, intoxicated officers harassed 2 decorated service members and attempted an unlawful arrest. "Do you think that just disappears?" Jake began to sweat, scrambling for an excuse. "We didn't know they were military." David cocked his head. "So your point is, it's okay to harass people if you don't know they're military?" The question hung with moral weight. Brett tried a final gambit. "You have no proof. It's our word against theirs. 3 officers against 2 civilians." Daniel smiled, not friendly. "Prosecutor, how many video angles do you have?" 4, Lisa said, glancing at her tablet. "Louise started filming inside. The brothers' footage covers the lot. I've got the last 8 minutes." David added casually, "Our watch is recorded as well." He lifted his wrist to display a rugged military timepiece, synced audio and video, standard protocol when they were in civilian areas. Brett staggered as if punched. Lisa swiped through files on her tablet. "I have 3 bar patrons willing to testify," she added, "and Danny's security cameras were working." Rick sank onto the curb, hands over his face. He understood then. This was over. Not just tonight, but careers, reputations, everything. Desperation crept into Brett's voice. "What do you want? Money? We can pay. I'll apologize." Daniel's reply was steady and cold. "We want justice. Not just for us, but for every person you've treated this way." Lisa nodded slowly. "Because I'd bet my entire career the 3 of you have a record of this behavior. How many people have you targeted, Brett? How many lives have you disrupted because you thought the rules didn't apply to you?" Jake was crying now, real tears, messy and panicked. "My career, my family, they'll never forgive me." "You should have thought about that earlier," David replied, completely unmoved. "Before you decided that intimidating people was your right." A sheriff's patrol car rolled into the lot, lights flashing. 2 deputies stepped out. One of them a long-tenured officer who had never liked Brett's circle of influence. "Prosecutor Monroe," the deputy greeted respectfully. "We got your call. Are these the men you mentioned?" "They are," Lisa confirmed. 3 counts of targeted harassment, attempted aggravated assault, misuse of authority, and behavior unbecoming a public official. And that's just what we can name on the spot. As the 3 officers were handcuffed, an irony thick enough to taste, Brett stared at the twins. "How?" he asked, the confusion almost childlike. "How did you plan all this?" Daniel and David exchanged that familiar, silent message. Then Daniel replied, "We didn't plan anything. You created the situation yourself. We just made sure there was evidence." While the disgraced officers were being led to the patrol cars, Louis approached the brothers. "Thank you," he said simply. "These guys have been doing this for years." No one ever had the courage to push back. "How many people?" David asked. Louis exhaled. "Dozens, maybe hundreds over the years. They always picked the same kind of targets. Anyone who looked different, anyone they thought wouldn't fight back." Daniel nodded, something shifting behind his eyes. What began as self-defense had now become something far larger. Lisa closed her tablet. "You're free to go for tonight. I'll need full statements tomorrow." She paused. "Is there anything else you want to tell me about these 3? The brothers exchanged another silent glance, the kind only forged in combat zones. "Maybe," Daniel said. "But first we need to make a few calls." Then something unexpected happened. Brett's phone buzzed inside the patrol car. Rick's phone buzzed. Jake's too. all at once. Brett unlocked his screen. His face went white. The video had gone viral. Corrupt cops exposed. 2.3 million views in 3 hours. Every angle. The bar. The parking lot. The threats. The attempted use of force. Their full names. Their badge numbers. Everything. "Oh no," Jake whispered, watching his career dissolve in real time. Comments poured in. People identifying similar incidents. Calling for accountability. Naming more victims. 17 victims had already contacted the district attorney's office. Lisa scanned her tablet, all with nearly identical stories, some with recordings, some with written statements. "We can fix this," Brett sputtered from inside the car. "We can talk." "Be quiet," the deputy sheriff said firmly. "You're suspended without pay pending a federal investigation. And Brett, your entire record is being reviewed. Every arrest, every report for the last 8 years. Rick was crying now. His wife had already called after seeing the video online. She had filed for divorce. Their mortgage, their son's tuition, all depended on the salary he had just lost. David crossed his arms. "You had so many chances to stop, every warning, every opportunity to turn around, and you ignored all of them." The deputy sheriff approached Daniel. "Captain Thompson, the Pentagon has called. They want your statements for a possible federal review of any officer who interacted with active duty personnel." Brett retched inside the patrol car. By morning, 7 national news outlets had picked up the story. By the afternoon, the mayor announced a full overhaul of the police department. By the evening, the 3 former officers were facing 23 criminal charges combined. Luis reopened the bar. The line stretched down the block. People wanted to visit the place where long-abused power had finally been confronted. At their hotel, the twins watched the news. 18 calls from the Pentagon," Daniel said dryly. "They want us to testify about corrective procedures. And 3 invitations to speak on preventing officer misconduct," David added, scrolling through updates. Online comments poured in, people expressing relief, sharing their own stories. Justice, delayed for years, was finally real. At the detention center, Brett stared at the cell wall. Everything gone. Career, future, reputation, all destroyed because he had judged 2 men solely by their appearance. The same system he had bent for years now closed in on him with exacting precision. And as millions watched his downfall, one truth echoed across every screen. Arrogance always brings consequences. Always. 6 months later, Brett Coleman was serving coffee in a roadside diner, a long way from the authority he once carried. Sentenced to 3 years of probation, he had lost everything. His badge, his pension, his home, and eventually his family. Jake worked at a call center selling insurance, his voice shaking every time he had to state his name. Rick became a night shift security guard at a supermarket and avoided mirrors entirely. The police department underwent a full reconstruction. 17 officers were dismissed. 43 cases were reopened. 8 wrongfully accused citizens were cleared and compensated. Daniel Thompson was promoted to major and placed in charge of ethics and conduct training for police agencies across 6 states. "Respect isn't demanded," he told packed lecture halls. "It's earned, every day." David accepted a Pentagon position advising on military-civilian relations. His photo appeared on the cover of Time magazine with the headline, "The Commander Who Changed the National Conversation." Luis expanded his bar into a 3-location business. He began teaching bartenders how to safely document and report abuse of authority. His slogan became well known across the country: "Silent witnesses are accomplices." Lisa Monroe was elected chief district attorney with 73% of the vote, the first black woman to ever hold that office. On Brett's final day of probation, a TV in the diner showed Daniel giving an interview. "Hate doesn't define who we are," Major Thompson said. "It defines who we choose not to be." Brett switched off the TV, the weight of irony settling heavily on him. He had once held every advantage: a badge, a system that protected him, and a belief that he couldn't be touched. The Thompson brothers had nothing but their integrity, and yet they won. Because in the end, arrogance always collapses in front of competence. Bias always loses to character. And those who judge others by appearances always discover too late that they misjudged the wrong people. The greatest revenge was never to ruin someone else. It was to build something so strong, so meaningful, that your detractors became too small to reach it. Daniel and David proved that, and Brett learned it far too late. Justice has no color, but it has consequences.